So, hi everybody. Welcome. Thank you for being with us today. This is our last official webinar for the year. Our next meeting, we will be live in person with our wonderful friend, good friend of the Wagner Society, Will Berger, will be joining us live and in person at the JCCSF in San Francisco, our old meeting grounds. So we're really looking forward to that. We will be sending out an announcement on that and asking our members to kindly register, because we're going to have to adhere to the room size limit for this event. So this is all new. We're going forward in a hybrid manner, and we'll just have to take things as they come and work with the constraints that we have. We are endeavoring to figure out a way to film these live presentations and then make them available to members on demand. So we're working with all of this. Again, it's a hybrid situation. It's all new to us, and we're working on it behind the scenes. So we appreciate your patience. So we have a wonderful talk in store for us today. A new speaker for us, but she's certainly not new to our dear friend Richard. So we'll just wait a little bit here. There's the announcement of what today's talk will encompass, and we'll be in a holding pattern here until some more people join us. So we've got about 50 folks who have signed up today, a little more than 50. I think it was about getting close to 60. So take a while to let people in. So at any rate, I'll let everybody in on my not very well guarded secret. I was at the Beethoven Marathon yesterday for the morning and the evening sessions. All 32 Beethoven piano works are being performed there in sequence, and it's really mind-boggling, the group of talented performers that we have available to us to come together and put on this magnificent show for those who are able to get there. And interestingly enough, the lunch break was long enough that we didn't have to endure the Blue Angels flyovers during the piano performances, which is always a charming factor in Fleet Week here in San Francisco. So anyway, welcome everybody. We hope you get comfortable and have your beverage of choice ready. Let's see who we've got here. Got quite a few people. We still have quite a few people to go here. Hello and welcome everyone. Who we've got? Yeah, we've got John from Hawaii. I feel like romper room here. I welcome. Kirk Davis, is always great to see you, Kirk. Sylvia Lynn, chapter president of the San Francisco Opera Guild, East Bay chapter. Welcome. Lots of friends here. So welcome everybody. We're not quite at the halfway point of welcoming people to the webinar. So I'm going to wait until we get a little bit more participation here. And we are still 5 minutes out from our start time. I have had a few people ask me if, we're going to continue doing webinars. Are we going to go back 100% to having meetings in person? And so far, the verdict I've received is that we're going to we're going to continue doing, we're going to have our meetings, and we're also going to have webinars, because we're able to reach a much larger audience with webinars than we can with just meetings in person. And people with mobility concerns, the difficulty of getting into San Francisco for a meeting, that's a challenge. So we're going to do a hybrid going forward, a mix of webinars and also live meetings, which we hope to be able to record for later viewing. So got a few more people filtering in. Let's see who else we've got here. Oh, we have Andrea Buchanan, our bond rep. Hello, Andrea, coming to us from the UK. She just saw a Flying Dutchman in Paris and was telling me all about it. Hi, Andrea. Okay, people filtering in. Still have a few minutes before our standard start time. And Andrea sends a hello to everyone as well. One of our biggest fans, to tell you the truth. She doesn't like to miss our meetings, and we're happy about that. Okay, we're about at the halfway mark of welcoming folks. We're going to wait a couple more minutes before I get started with announcements. Okay. Did you send invites out to folks, Gundula? No?
No, I didn't know that I could.
Oh, I should have invited you to do that, because I saw a couple of names I didn't recognize on the attendee list, but we will be taking this and reducing it to a video stream for distribution. If you're interested in inviting some of your friends, that would be great. So we're getting close to our appointed start time, and we've got the stream is coming in. The pilgrims are on the Wartburg. Welcome, everyone. Get comfortable. Wait another minute or so before we get rolling here. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the Wagner Society of Northern California, we're going to return to a live meeting next month. That will be with William Berger, a Metropolitan Opera broadcaster and author. We meet in San Francisco at the JCCSF, and that is going to be invitation only to our members, because there's a limited number of people who can be in the meeting room. And of course, we have to follow the San Francisco Department of Health protocols, checking vaccinations, it'd be fully vaccinated people only. That's their rules, not ours. And so we have to abide by it. That's house rules. So that's going to be members only by reservation. Also coming up December 12th is our annual holiday party, our Cosima Wagner birthday celebration. Again, this year will be at the Marines Memorial Club and Hotel, our favored haunt. We will, as is customary, have a wonderful musical program for everyone to enjoy. Our musical guests are going to be Dennis Dubin, will be playing the piano. He is on the music staff at San Francisco Opera, former Adler Fellow. He is a rehearsal conductor and a prompter for the San Francisco Opera. He famously was the stage prompter for the Barber of Seville at the drive-in movie. And that's a real story that would stand your hair on end. He had a crazy job there. Our musical guest is bass baritone Trey Richards. Now, those of you who attended our presentation about the Vegas City Ring, and those of you who went out on YouTube and watched those 4 condensed versions of the ring taking place in locales all over the landscape of Las Vegas, Trey Richards was the absolutely ravishingly sung Wotan for that performances. And he's graciously agreed to fly up here from Vegas and sing for us. He's going to have a program of Wagner scenes and maybe a tad bit of our last year's birthday boy, Ludwig van Beethoven. So that is going to be December 12th at the Marines Memorial Club and Hotel. This we'll be sending invitations out for that shortly. So can look for that in your mailbox, make sure and sign up early. We'll have a lot of champagne for that one. It's always a lovely, lovely event. People really look forward to that. So we're proud for that. I haven't started doing any programming for next year, but I've got some ideas percolating in my brain, and we'll be making that announcement and then figuring out which of our 2022 meetings is going to be the live meeting, and then the others will be webinars, 1 live meeting per quarter going forward. So we're at about 40 people here now. So I think I'm going to go ahead and let the rest of the folks trickle in while I announce our speaker for today. Also, we have our wonderful webinar producer, Emma, here in the background. I couldn't do this without Emma. I can't press buttons and talk at the same time, or chew gum, much less. So anyway, our speaker today is Gundula Kreuzer. She is a professor of music at Yale University. She specializes in history and theory of opera with a special focus on staging and technology, mediality, and contemporary indie opera. Screen media archaeologist, and German and European cultural history since 1800, Verdi, Wagner, and Hindemith. Gundula Kreuzer studied musicology, philosophy, and modern history at the University of Münster in Westphalia and also Oxford, where she earned her Master of Studies and her PhD in musicology. She held a junior research postdoctoral fellowship at Merton College in Oxford before joining the Yale Department of Music in 2005. Professor Kreuzer approaches music from a wide variety of interdisciplinary perspectives, such as social, cultural, and political history, as well as theories of technology and multimedia. And this will be the basis of her talk today. Her award-winning book, Verdi and the Germans, The Unification to the Third Reich, on Cambridge University Press, was published in 2010. And her second monograph, Curtain, Gong, Steam, Wagnerian Technologies of 19th-Century Opera, was published in 2018 on University of California Press. And this book addresses how composers since the late 18th century increasingly tried to control certain aspects of staging, embracing the newly evolving technologies that were available to them. So with that, I'm going to disappear and turn this over to Professor Kreuzer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Terry, and thank you, Emma. Thank you for the invitation to speak here today. It's a really great honor to be here with you. And I will start sharing my screen.
Okay, I'm going to get out of here now. Thank you.
Okay, can you see my slides?
Yes.
Great. Wonderful, thank you. So it's a great honor to be here with you, and the here with you is of course digitally mediated. And that gets us right to the topic of my talk. And you can see that I slightly changed the title and added an end today, because I think there's no way to think about opera today without thinking about mediality and the resonances, in fact, of what Wagner and others were trying to do in the 19th century. So let's dive right in. The topic of my talk is the role of technology in facilitating multimedia presentations that are as lifelike as possible, right? We wish that we would be together and we could, I hear you have hybrid meetings coming up. That's all about the virtual reality mediation. So today in my talk, I will focus mostly not on today's world, but perhaps provocatively on analog stage technologies of the 19th century. Before the rise of film, opera provided arguably the most lavish form of audiovisual multimediality. And since the late 18th century, opera makers across Europe were competing with the rising popularity of optical entertainments, multimedia entertainments, in creating ever more immersive and realistic-looking spectacles. The Paris Opera spearheaded many of those efforts, but it was famously Richard Wagner's Der Ring des Nibelungen that emerged during an almost 3-decade period, starting in 1848, as the most technologically complex operatic project envisioned to that date, and for a long time afterwards. So by way of an introduction today, I will start with the obvious, the difficulties of producing the ring cycle on stage. Wagner himself had originally cultivated the idea that then soon got attached to the ring, that it was impossible to stage the ring. And in 1841, even before completing the four libretti, he coquettishly claimed that he had conceived of an opera about Siegfried's death merely to satisfy my inner promptings, and nowise with the thought of a production in our theaters, and with the existing representational means, which I had to consider as in every sense insufficient. But Wagner, of course, soon began to desire a stage production and now pursued the opposite tack. He now asked some stage specialists to vouch for the libretto's performability, although with dubious results. At least the renowned theater director Edouard de Briand despaired in private. How to perform Das Rheingold? It requires the most extraordinary theatrical machinery. So at issue was not just Wagner's insistence on having all 4 operas premiere on consecutive nights, rather than spread out over several seasons, which is of course something that still proves difficult anywhere but in Bayreuth. But daunting was also the grandeur and nature of Wagner's scenic visions, given the contemporary request that was only hyped in Wagner's writings to stage everything as realistically as possible, no matter how supernatural the story. What to do with all those swimming nixies, fighting dragons, open transformations, and a stage engulfed in fire for much longer than anyone else had previously dared to risk? So add to all that complexity Wagner's aesthetic ideal of the Gesamtkunstwerk, that is his call for the collaboration of all art forms towards a total artistic vision under the direction of a single artist. And it is clear why these practical challenges made it imperative that Wagner should seek to take responsibility for all details of staging. And this goal, of course, eventually led him to pull off the astonishing feat of establishing his own cutting-edge festival theater in Bayreuth for the exclusive purpose of producing the Ring Cycle, which was premiered there in 1876. Small wonder that critics have since zeroed in on the machines and devices used in Bayreuth to realize the most blatant mechanical challenges, such as the fabled swimming wagons for the Rhine maidens, designed like most of Bayreuth's stage machinery by Karl Brandt, Wagner's most important Bayreuth collaborator and the foremost, most renowned German theater technician of his time. What I want to draw attention to today, though, is what I consider to have been an even greater practical challenge than these individual demands on stage technology posed by the ring libretti. Yet a demand that the predominant focus on individual stage technologies has tended to obscure in plain sight. Namely, the task of combining all these different elements on stage into a unified whole. In a word, I want to address the question of multimediality. And this question has usually been raised for opera in the most general terms, relating to the combination of text, music, and visuals, or what musicologists have often called opera's three signifying systems. But my point is that, unlike in film, opera's visual component is not prefabricated and merely into a unit that merely needs to be mounted in close synchronization with the music. Instead, in each performance, it is newly assembled from a range of media and materialities. Think of painted canvases, material structures, real-life objects, papier-mâché dragons, colored light, costumed bodies, and so on. How could all these elements be amalgamated so holistically as to fulfill Wagner's aim to immerse spectators in the representation of an idealized natural world? And so in order at least to begin to answer that question, the first part of my talk takes a quick look at Wagner's theoretical approach to technologies and to his desire to veil the artificiality of his stagings. As I have argued in my book, and thank you again for the generous introduction, this effort was supported by several devices expressly developed to hide their own technicity, while mediating between other representational means, or what I have dubbed Wagnerian Technologies. In part 2 and 3 of my talk, I will introduce my favorite such devices, the curtain and steam, before taking a step back from individual machines to consider Wagner's overall ideal of how the audience should perceive the resulting staging. I will suggest that he upheld a painterly ideal of what he called the stage image. Despite the Bayreuth Theater's technical panache, Wagner used his 3D means to ultimately produce 2D images. In other words, he perceived a perceptual flattening of the stage. And this, I argue, served as his ultimate means of integrating his heterogeneous technologies of production. And that is an argument that's actually not in the book that I've developed since, just in case you're wondering. And then at the end, returning to our digital age, this technique of flattening may reveal surprising resonances between Wagner's aesthetics of staging and the recent screenification of opera and HD broadcasts, Zoom performances, and digital festivals. So, admittedly, the term Wagnerian technologies would have been anathema to the composer. For all his dependence on the latest machineries, he personally and aesthetically despised everything technological. In his letters and writings, the term machine or mechanical, the terms almost appear like four-letter words. And like many romantics, Wagner resented the inexorable advance of industrialization and its alienating effects on nature, culture, and human lives. And here's just one example. Thus, it is the machine, he wrote in 1849, which is the cold, heartless benefactor of luxury-hungry men. Thanks to the machine, they have finally been able to make the human mind serve them. For led astray from artistic endeavor, from artistic discovery, they betray, dishonor, and devour themselves in mechanical refinements. in attempts to unite with the machine instead of uniting with nature in the artwork. Wagner's mid-century theory of the artwork of the future was outlining precisely how to overcome these adverse effects of mechanical modernization and how to return the corrupted Western civilization to an ideal natural state, namely by means of his unified communal or total work of art, the Gesamtkunstwerk. It is unsurprising then that Wagner's aesthetic writings are conspicuously silent about the role of technology in the Gesamtkunstwerk, versus what Wagner called all the arts: dance, music, poetry, architecture, sculpture, painting. Wagner didn't willingly dispose his reliance on machines. And just as on page, he would later attempt to veil his machines on stage. In his 1862 preface to the Ring libretto, he explicitly demanded that if the ring was ever to materialize on stage, the cords, ropes, laths, and scaffoldings of the stage decorations should be carefully hidden from the audience, because, he said, as seen from the wings, they destroy all vestige of illusion. That is to say, that the mechanisms facilitating the visual scenery were at the same time to be cloaked, or what we might call artified, by its artistic facade. The philosopher Theodor Adorno famously critiqued this effort in Marxist terms when arguing that Wagner concealed his means of production by the outward appearance of the product. By simulating a fictional world as seemingly natural reality, he said, Wagner glossed over both human and mechanical labor involved in his creation. Adorno compared the result to that of the Phantasmagoria, a popular optical entertainment of the late 18th and early 19th centuries, where the enabling devices of the Laterna Magica and screens were for the first time masked by total darkness, so that the projections would appear like real, as in real apparitions, real ghosts emerging out of darkness, as real as that can be. By similarly camouflaging the stage technological origins of the Gesamtkunstwerk, Wagner sought to render it autopoietic, self-animated, and ultimately natural. And in order to do so, as I have already suggested, he developed some hidden technologies as multimedial glue to interlink his different media and veil their interstices. To be sure, Wagner did not invent these technologies from scratch. As with so many other aspects of his works, he took decisive cues from contemporary theatrical practice, particularly in Paris. And another disclaimer: when discussing stage technologies, I use Wagner's name as a shorthand for his entire production team. Very rarely do we know exactly who initiated a particular practice, particularly in Bayreuth, where most decisions were made in person and on location, without leaving a paper trail. However, we can safely assume that many of these inventions dated back to Brandt, who was despairing of what he called the composer's decidedly unpractical nature. So despite these models and helpers, I contend that Wagner's ideals and the Ring cycle's extraordinary technological demands did then, in the end, push further the stage practices of his time in a way that would foster their mutual integration. And so we move to our first example, the curtain. A paradigmatic example of one such stage practice Wagner developed is the curtain. And I will here summarize a very complex historical argument in just a few bold strokes. So I hope you bear with me and apologize kind of the summary here. The curtain is one of the oldest and most ubiquitous theatrical technologies. And as Jane Austen laconically declared in Mansfield Park, 1814, there's very little sense in a play without a curtain, unquote. Following predecessors in antiquity, curtains had been veiling the proscenium stage's opening since the rise of the Baroque theater, and had been popularized precisely by the international dissemination of opera since the early 1600s. The curtain usually had several purposes. It veiled opera's often elaborate sets prior to a performance, and operatic sets were often way more elaborate than theatrical ones. Hence, it was opera that popularized the curtain. It also thus revealed the performance itself to be a special event. If you can't always already see the stage, when the curtain goes up, that's when the special event starts. And it also separated the stage and its fictional world from the everyday world of the auditorium. And its movements thus signaled the beginnings and ends of performances or individual acts. The curtain thus provided a spatio-temporal frame for a performance without being part of any particular work. It straddled a liminal space between stable architecture and the dynamic social ritual of theatrical exhibition. The curtain's individual uses in performance were regulated by theatrical practice. For example, an 1839 German theater handbook prescribed for both opera and spoken drama that the opening of the curtain should, as an absolute rule, occur immediately after the completion of the overture or interlude. Every pause has a disruptive effect. And an Italian stage director's manual of 1825 additionally warned not to interrupt the overture with the inopportune raising of the curtain. So the curtain was to be aligned exactly with the end of the musical introduction at the beginning of the show proper. And similarly, it should close right with the end of the stage performance. In a sense, then, the curtain could be considered an automated mechanism around the edges of a performance. This predictability had to be uncomfortable for Wagner, who, as we heard, intended to make every part of his productions intentionally contribute to an organic whole. He therefore started to integrate the curtain into his works by individualizing its movements. First, following French models, he prescribed when the curtain was to open and close. And with the ring cycle, he took a page out of Giacomo Meyerbeer's grand opera Le Prophète of 1849 and indicated the curtain's opening by the beat. This ensured that the stage was revealed in exact alignment with both musical and dramatic developments. In Siegfried, for example, the first act curtain begins to move as Mime starts hammering on stage. The Nibelung joins in and thereby explains those extraordinary harsh rhythms of the preceding orchestral measures. So the curtain, rather than drawing attention to itself, sonically recedes gently, allowing the orchestral sound to flow onto the stage and the stage music to blend into the orchestra. Or put differently, the curtain confirms a perspectival switch of the orchestra from observer to participant. And we're going to listen to that, and please let me know if the sound quality is not up to speed. Then I will have to click another button. Oops. So we all know it. Just that shift as Mime starts hammering. The most refined interlacing of instrumental music, curtain, stage action, and singing is clearly the famous underwater opening of Das Rheingold. Wagner asked for the curtain to rise in measure 126 of the famous 136 instrumental measures of crescendoing E-flat major arpeggios. This is 14 measures after the entry of the trumpets and first violins, which means that at this point there's virtually every string and wind instrument engaged and no further increase in E-flat major undulation possible. And it is at that breaking point, when he has used all his orchestral means, that the orchestral waves push up or burst through the curtain, and then the curtain opening lets the arpeggio spill over into the lower woodwinds 4 upward swooshes of E-flat major scales. Beginning 3 measures, or about 4 seconds after the curtain, these scales mimic its upward pull, wash up the first Rhine maiden, trigger a first harmonic change, and finally prompt singing. And we'll listen to this. We'll start a little bit before the curtain goes up. Curtain begins to rise, and the scales. What scales? What we experience here is a gradual rise in media signification, exactly as Wagner had envisioned in his 1849 treatise, The Artwork of the Future. A medial crescendo from raw orchestral sound via descriptive music and pantomime to vocal song. And this process is continued even into singing, since the Rhine maiden's first words are notoriously onomatopoetic, as if a signifying language had yet to be formed in this primal opening scene that Wagner dubbed the world's beginning. The curtain thus participates in, perhaps even facilitates, the emergence of the Gesamtkunstwerk out of music. It is the knowing intermediary between music and scene, aware of the moment when the orchestral depiction concentrates to such a degree that vision needs to be added. As a contemporary critic observed, the curtain opens and the eye beholds what the ear has heard. The orchestra, in other words, prepares the immersed gaze beyond the curtain, while the curtain epitomizes this mysterious passage of listener into absorbed spectator. The curtain sees for the audience as it temporarily directs the eyes and ears, much like the leitmotifs guide the listener's musical understanding. A second step towards making the curtain an expressive ingredient for Wagner was to indicate not just its timing, but also its speed. Wagner did this only once at an opera's beginning. In the Götterdämmerung prelude, it opens slowly. Yet arguably nowhere is an opening curtain more redolent of a drama's ambivalence and trajectory than here. After 2 waves of ascending Rhine motif undulations, each preceded by those ominous chords associated with sleep and awakening from Die Walküre and Siegfried, the curtain's slow motion coincides with the muting of the strings and the inversion of descending figurations. We're going to listen to this as well. We'll start here where I marked it in green. Curtain rises slowly. The curtain thus foretells the stage directions for the ensuing non-scene, somber silence and absence of any movement. Moreover, its hesitancy seems to summarize both what has occurred since the close of the previous opera and what is to follow. It communicates the underlying lethargy that has befallen Wotan and the heaviness that will soon affect the remaining characters. Reinforced by momentary musical stagnation, the exceptionally slow curtain prefigures, more viscerally than the non's rope, the entire cycle's denouement. The slow curtain is a channel of cosmic knowledge, a technology of clairvoyance short-circuiting both time and space. Beyond merely linking music and vision at the exact moment, this curtain offers an expressive interpretive lens on the ensuing drama. Following French and Italian practices, Wagner indicated speeds more frequently for closing curtains than for opening curtains. At the end, they emphasized the dramatic state of affairs. Particularly notable is the fast curtain at the end of Die Walküre's first act, where it hastily hides what the music continues to reveal in agitated, violent figurations, and so on. Contemporary critics had a point when ridiculing this overly premature curtain as a moralistic measure, and we might dub it a decency curtain. Overall, my comparison with countless French, Italian, and German scores of the time shows that Wagner's careful attention to the curtain was nothing new in and of itself. But what distinguished his approach, to the point of becoming notable and widely imitated, was his consistent accumulation of curtain directions, their careful integration into the musical fabric, and the degree to which he used them to guide the listener's experience. But Wagner's minutely choreographed curtain directions brought with them a practical challenge: how to effect such nuanced curtains. Here, for once, Wagner's aesthetic desires did simulate an overall innovation in stage technology, the so-called Wagner curtain. This curtain did not fly up vertically, as in most European theaters, the so-called German curtain. It did not simply part in the middle to open sideways or to move outward diagonally, as did the Italian curtain, or to the sides and then up, as did the French curtain. Instead, the Wagner curtain parted centrally and then moved simultaneously both sideways and up. This intricate move was aided by the curtain's comparatively light fabric and effected via a diagonal pull and special conic winches. Contemporary observers confirmed that Bayreuth's curtain could indeed be operated faster and with greater precision than traditional curtains, making its actual movements less obvious. As the Yale music instructor Gustav Stöckel admired, the naturalness of its movement, quote, leaves the impression that some unseen hands have moved it very gracefully out of sight, unquote. Thus, the curtain's complex pull further distracted from its own technological conditioning. By contrast to the angular and rigid, and that is obviously mechanical, curtains of old, its animating mechanism appeared as a quasi-vital force. And this de-emphasis of the curtain's materiality was furthered by its looks. Rather than the customary red, it featured stripes of likely the brown or yellow hues of the theater. Bayreuth's curtain was thus custom-made technology designed to afford Wagner's gestural audiovisual framings and thereby to enable its own transition from mere technology into participating medium. So our second example, much shorter. If Wagner's curtain mediated between music and vision at the beginnings and endings of scenes, my second example emerged primarily to effect Wagner's open transformations. In Das Rheingold, for example, the scenery shifts seamlessly between three very different settings: the bottom of the Rhine, a mountaintop, and an underground cave. Wagner rendered these geological transitions with rather lengthy illustrative music that sonically depicts the gradual change of locale, so as not to interrupt the theatrical illusion with a curtain or pause. Representing these transformations visually as well was crucial for Wagner to complete his audience immersion. But it posed tremendous challenges. And perhaps to alleviate these, Wagner called for vapors of various kinds that literally form the connecting tissue between the opera's three habitats. At the end of scene 1, fogs ascend from the river Rhine until they disperse into little clouds to reveal Valhalla for scene 2. In sulfurous fumes veil Wotan's and Loge's journeys to and from Nibelheim, which literally means home of fog. More than just a practical aid, fogs also established in the first transition were also established in the first transition as a key visual agent of the ring, a marker of the Nordic mythic realms and the primordial, innocent nature out of which the cosmic drama develops. Notably, this first transformation in Das Rheingold is the only one in all of Wagner where the change of locale is neither observed nor retraced by any of the characters. That means it's not dramatically necessary, but instead it establishes the importance of nature for the drama itself, epitomized by the essence of vapor. And musically, in a Beethovenian manner, Wagner develops and dissects the string figuration of the so-called Rhine motif until its fragments ascend pitchwise and timbrally like little puffs of clouds. At the end, with flute and harps, those surefire signifiers of the heavens. And again, a short music example. Ring motif. Clouds with flutes and harps. It was certainly Karl Brandt who took this quest for fog literally and equipped the Bayreuth stage with an unheard of steam apparatus. He installed 2 used locomotive boilers in the machine house behind the Festspielhaus, which delivered water vapor into a repository in the substage. From there, steam was distributed, regulated, and released through a grid of pipes and adjustable slots horizontally and vertically across the stage floor, as well as through 2 movable split tubes above and below the stage. As with the curtain, the Bayreuth theater was not the first to use water vapors. At least in Paris at the Opéra, some water vapor was used for Le Prophète, for the fires in the end, but they were very small amounts. And here again, Wagner upped the ante. As reviews and rehearsal notes confirm, here's one example, he had the entire stage shrouded in mists to veil and at the same time animate his open transformations. What George Bernard Shaw later christened a steam curtain both affected and masked the required scenic transitions. Even though an actual cloud curtain, a painted drop, was lowered behind the steam to mask the mechanical and the noise of the transitions. Steam then might be called the Wagnerian technology par excellence. It was the most realistic use of Wagner's media, and it covered over those cords and ropes required for the actual scene change. Once discovered as a large-scale stage medium, what's more, steam quickly assumed further functions. Brandt used red illuminated steam to safely realize Brunhilde's magic fire. And the ill-fated dragon as well breathed not fire, but steam. But I would suggest that steam accrued more than just representational clout. With its vapory, unbounded, and constantly changing shapes, it had the unique potential of mediating between 2- and 3-dimensional media, between flat, painted canvases and practicable scenery. As a moving substance, it also helped integrate the motion and corporeality of singers with the stasis of sets and props. Thus, it typified a medium whose industrial origin, in locomotive boilers no less, was veiled by its appearance. And it perfectly embodied Wagner's ideal that the singers be enclosed by scenic landscape and music, as with an atmospheric ring of art and nature. While forming part of the stage picture, steam, like music, was time-dependent and fleeting. It was both mimetic and symbolic. And some early Bayreuth reporters picked up on precisely this Wagnerian quality of steam. As Gustav Stöckel commented, scene 4 of Das Rheingold appeared to be the least well executed in 1876, since, I quote, clouds, mists, and vapors could no longer be employed to heighten the illusion, unquote. Through its very presence, steam helped transmute the mixed media simulation into hyperreality. It was the dry icing on the cake of naturalist stage design. Or in more practical terms, it was an ephemeral multimedial putty to help opera's diverse media adhere in performance. In practice, though, not all was well with Bayreuth steam. The new stage element proved difficult to tame, leaving holes in its evanescent fabric while damaging instruments in the pit and evoking the scent of the laundry room. Worse, one critic described a coarse material whizzing and hissing, and actually many critics commented on the noise, thus betraying acoustically the industrial origins that Wagner had sought to annul visually. And that is also caricatured on the right side, right? The industrial origins with the chimney of the dragon. But for our purpose today, it suffices to say that Bayreuth discovered the fundamentally theatrical nature of water vapor. Large-scale steam effects became associated with Wagner for decades to come. On stage, Wasserdampf had become Wagner-Dampf. Yet for all its versatility, the appearance of steam in Bayreuth was still tied to a fundamentally representational ideal. As Stöckel had noted, it was not constantly employed to aid the optical integration. To provide a consistent frame of reference for these, I suggest Wagner instead took recourse to an idea that might seem antithetical, namely, the notion that all stage media ought to contribute to the overall effect of a flat surface. In other words, Wagner ultimately aimed for his production to be perceived like an animated and resonant painting. This pictorial orientation of Wagner is evident on many levels. For example, illusionist painting played a key role in his treatise, The Artwork of the Future. Visually complementing singers and material objects, painted scenery was to deck out the stage with the colors and appearances of nature. And in return, the art of painting would be consummated in the Gesamtkunstwerk. And Wagner wrote, that which the landscape painter has erstwhile forced into the narrow frames of panel pictures, with this he will henceforth fill the ample framework of the tragic stage. The illusion with which his brush and finest blend of colors could only hint at and merely distantly approach, he will here bring to perfectly deceptive representation through the artistic use of every known device of optics and artistic lighting. In the expanded theatrical frame with its real light and living humans, Wagner expected painting, quote, to effect a livelier impression, unquote, and to reach larger audiences. And these enhanced affordances were the lure with which he hoped to attract the collaboration of visual artists rather than mere stage designers. And these artists would provide, in a way, not just the backdrop for the characters' actions, but the singers and colored light became animating additions to the paintings. Tellingly, Wagner's concern with the optical surface resonated with discourses in the visual arts on how to achieve depth perception. In an influential treatise of 1893, the sculptor Adolf Hildebrand claimed that all spatial relations and all distinctions of form are read off from a single vantage point, so to speak, from front to back. In artistic representation, it is therefore a matter of setting and train the single unifying movement into depth, unquote. This unification was achieved by tending above all to the frontal plane of the artwork. The more coherent and recognizable the surface effect of the object's image, the more coherent is the idea of depth. For it is then stimulated by the depth relations between those two-dimensional units and not by the spatial values of the individual units that compose the image. In other words, even sculptors who worked with homogeneous, voluminous materials were concerned with organizing their intended objects according to a single unifying frame. And that frame was achieved by assuming the effect of a picture plane, by creating the impression as if the beholder were seeing a flat, continuous surface that only perfectly simulated depth. The 1876 Ring occasionally emphasized this frontal plane literally. For example, a partly transparent scrim covered the proscenium's opening for the underwater scene, clouds were projected onto veils and gauzes, and even the ride of the Valkyries was feigned not with actual horses, but with lantern slides projected onto scenery. Wagner's unprecedentedly detailed stage directions reveal the same concern with achieving a coherent painterly surface. And this conceptualization of operatic scenes as two-dimensional also throws new light on Wagner's open transformations. For the second Rheingold transition, a Bayreuth rehearsal score documents Wagner as desiring the following effect. Not tableau vivant, but a picture of life shall unfurl everywhere before us. And the German formulation, Bilder entrollen, leaves no doubt about Wagner's technological conception, whereby one single image was to continually unroll before the spectator's eyes. This expression evokes moving canvases, a technology that had been reintroduced from the Baroque into early 19th century boulevard theaters to emulate the spectacular optical entertainments of the time. And in 1882, Brandt famously deployed such moving canvases in Parsifal. But more importantly than Wagner's future literal employment of that technique is that his allusion to it betrays once more a two-dimensional conception of spatial representation. Canvases cannot move along the chosen plane in a pre-ordered sequence, but always on a flat plane. The analogy to the image generation of film is obvious, but there is also a perceptual kinship with cinema, that of the flat surface facilitating lifelike moving images. No wonder that Wagner frequently wrote of his stagings as the scenic picture. Wagner's ideal that a staging ought to appear like an animated painting was fortified even by some of the celebrated innovations of the Bayreuth Festspielhaus, which was built after his directions and earlier ideas of Gottfried Semper by Otto Brückwald. This two-dimensional approach may seem surprising. After all, the theater is famous for its technological panache, indicated by the very high stage house. But many commentators in 1876 admiringly noted the production's overall smooth picture quality, which was enhanced by a plethora of Bayreuth's architectural features. The amphitheatrical seating, the row of protruding columns at the side walls that narrowed towards the stage, and the fan-shaped ceiling all directed the gaze to the stage, where two successive proscenium both enhanced the traditional framing function and seemingly further foreshortened the stage image, since the second proscenium was significantly smaller than the first. Furthermore, the actual distance of the stage was veiled by the fact that, in Wagner's words, between the audience and the picture to be looked at, there's nothing plainly visible, merely a floating atmosphere of distance, unquote. Neither a substantial apron nor a prompter's box protruded from the stage, the footlights were hidden, and both orchestra and conductor remained invisible, because instead of the customary orchestra pit, Wagner's so-called mystic abyss left but a narrow gap between auditorium and stage, a barely visible and slightly curved line in the ground. Thus, in Bayreuth, the curtain line fell almost in one with both the edges of the stage and the acoustic gulf. Even the curtain itself participated in this visual flattening, since its brownish stripes defied the impression of depth. And the originally accidental total darkness of the auditorium further ensured that spectators could look at nothing but the illuminated stage image. This flattening effect of Bayreuth's technology of image production and perception also had an acoustic equivalent. In the festival theater's covered pit, the orchestra's sound was famously pre-mixed and then projected into the auditorium via what Wagner called an acoustic sounding board. And for audiences, the resulting sound obscures the exact position of individual instruments in the pit. And it also obscures incidental noises of tone production. and thus divested of both its spatial and its mechanical origins, the orchestral sound appears not only disembodied, but also as flattened, as deprived of the distance at which it is produced. It emanates instead from the same gulf that marks the curtain line. And according to a cognitive process Michel Chion has analyzed for sound film, and he calls it syncresis, the resulting acousmatic music attaches to the visual scenes much more easily. Thus, as has frequently been pointed out, the Bayreuth Theater's various techniques of flattening the performative surface do point forward towards the cinematic screen and its perceived illusionism. But they also reveal that 19th century modes of perception were trained to see a flat representational surface as deep, and a three-dimensional stage as flat, as an animated canvas. Cultivating these modes of perception was Wagner's ultimate means of veiling his staging's technical origins. He sought to conceal not just the ropes of individual stage technologies, but the stagedness of performance itself, the entire pretense of stage production, to wit, the stage. Wagner's Bayreuth production could thus in fact be viewed like a living and sounding image of life, mounted or projected on a wall right in front of the audience. So some brief concluding thoughts. What I've presented here today has largely been based on Wagner's ideals and on a theoretical look at his technologies. In practice, many of these devices didn't quite work as planned or had some unforeseen side effects, like that smell of the steam. And this discrepancy between ideal and reality was not just a result of as yet imperfect machines, something that could be fixed if only we had better technology. Instead, it was and remains inherent to the nature of live operatic production, where singing bodies can never be fully integrated with the ever more immersive visual media surrounding them on stage. So when we look again at Wagner's Ring production, we need to remember the distance between theory and practice, along with the fact that both were tied to an ultimately painterly vision. Already conservative in 1876, this approach would soon become dated by the emergence of film. In terms of my paper, film offered an entirely flat and visually unified animated medium that was coupled with live music in its early days and with perfectly synchronized sound in the sound film era. So why continue to strive for immersive homogeneity in a performative medium that can't ultimately provide it, when newer technical media can do at least better? Some opera directors in the early 20th century indeed turned to abstract or expressionist styles to avoid competing with filmic realism. But recent developments suggest that cinematic media have meanwhile themselves become challenged by VR technologies and digital media. And these latest advances once again foreground the question of how to integrate bodies. Small wonder that opera has also started to experiment with VR and video game engines, not least in the bid for younger audiences. And here's some examples. All of you will probably know many more. In 2017, Welsh National Opera's so-called Magic Butterfly solved the problem by doing away with the singers' bodies entirely. Motion capture technology translated the soprano's physical shape into an anime avatar that was seamlessly integrated into this computer-generated backdrop, while audiences at special consoles and booths next to the opera house could animate the cherry petals. More commonly, tech developers have been trying to make the spectators' bodies feel part of the production, alongside that of the singers. So I skipped the Royal Opera here. In February 2020, Relative Motion produced an extract of Tosca as the world's first made-for-virtual reality opera, which allowed online audiences with VR headsets to digitally navigate the church in which the clip was filmed and to mix and mingle with the characters. Although such experiments predate the pandemic, we have all witnessed a proliferation of online formats since March 2020. Beyond the increased streaming of previously staged content, original Zoom operas sprang into existence. Some used Zoom as both the medium and the message, being set in the COVID era. Others, like Whitesnake Project's Pandemic Trilogy, created stories both mythical and contemporary, with singers performing live in front of green screens in their homes and transported into elaborate computer-generated backgrounds via video game engines. Even when performed in real time, digital technology transformed the disparate elements of the production from broadcast from across the country into a coherent audiovisual stream for the audience. Wagnerian technologies on steroids. But the almost exclusive dependence on screens over the last year and a half has also accelerated an opposite impulse: the desire to experiment with radically embodied forms of operatic production away from the proto-cinematic proscenium. Such experiments had been spearheaded in 2012 by the industry, especially their mobile opera Hopscotch, which shuttled audiences around in limousines, and the site-specific outdoor production Sweetland, which had audiences move between different spaces in an LA State historic park. The industry's founder, Yuval Sharon, has meanwhile brought such efforts even to Wagner. Detroit and Chicago audiences could experience a radically adapted Götterdämmerung as a drive-through opera in a parking garage. Of course, these newly corporeal experiments with mobile performers and audiences depend heavily on digital technologies as well. Still, the dual development of online-only opera on the one hand and immersive in-person experiences on the other mirrors opera's fundamental tension between its seamless, immersive audiovisual aspirations and its always sweaty and creaky corporeal production. A tension that Wagner, like many others, tried but only imperfectly managed to resolve. Thank you.
Whoops.
Yes, I stopped.
Hi, I'm coming back on here. So thank you. That was really an interesting talk. I'm always amazed at the ingenuity that comes up in situations where a crisis occurs, such as what we've had with our COVIDization of opera. And we had one special touch project here locally with Opera Parallel. They had commissioned a new opera called Everest, which was about this ill-fated trip of hikers or mountaineers up on Everest. And they did the whole thing with little dots on their face, which were then animated and sung to. It was really quite interesting, although it is a little bit otherworldly. So we're going to open it up to any questions folks might have. I can start my video if anybody wants to look at my face. I'm not quite sure about that. Hi. Whoops, it started and stopped. So do we have any questions from folks? Someone asked if this will be recorded and available. We have endeavored to do that with all of our talks, Ms. Silverstein. So, and we will endeavor to do that here. So we do capture them. Does anybody have any questions? I mean,
I hope I flattened. I hope I didn't flatten everybody.
No, I don't.
Flattened by Reut.
I don't think you did. Emma, do you have a question?
Yes, I do have a question. So the tendency, the trend, the latest thought in the times of Wagner, what was revolutionary at the time with the new devices and the new approaches that he thought of. Then the theater went into this, expressionist direction, where things were downright crazy and not related to reality. And after the war, the theater again took a abrupt turn to empty stages, minimum lighting, and it also works. And it is very interesting to observe this changing direction of the artistic thought, but the true work of art always works, no matter how it is staged, because the material is good. And in Bayreuth, too, they staged with minimum means after the war, which was a good thing, and it took. It really took. So now when I see steam on stage, I always kind of wince. Oh, steam. Well, of course, they don't use steam anymore. They use carbon dioxide, but nevertheless, you can't get away from steam.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good comment. Even in symbolist theater, steam was present across all the different styles. I've actually looked at that a little bit. Across all the different styles, and then of course outside of opera, right? Pop concerts with a pop star. Baseball, some baseball teams have entered the stadium with a shroud of steam, so it's become this, mystifying this element of some divine kind of nature or great star. But apart from what it means, it's just very useful. An element on stage.
Yeah, we had a lot of that in the recent ring of Francesca Zambello. When they did the most recent iteration, the whole stage was a grid work, and the steam would come up through the floor, and it was really quite effective, I think. And I'm also thinking of minimalist things. The wonderful, they don't have a whole lot of images available of it, but the beautiful, beautiful set designs of Adolf Appia were again taking it away from this, bear skins and helmets and all that stuff, and making it more abstract. Everything's old is new again. They keep coming around and recycling these old ideas, but they become wonderful and fresh again as the technology has advanced. Okay, we've got a question here. David, I can't see your last name here. What do you think, what do you imagine Wagner would have thought of the famous machine ring in New York?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually think he would have hated it because it I've written about it because it's fantastic, right? Wagner hates machines, and he wants to make them disappear, and then Robert Lepage puts the machine right on stage. Yeah. And I think that some ideas behind it are very, very creative, are really great, that Wagner might have liked. That there really are the seamless transitions. Some of the transitions in Rheingold worked very well, where it really changes, the whole thing changes. There's no curtain, no steam needed in the changing of the staircase into the different formations. So I think some elements were very creative and that Wagner might have liked, but there were at least two problems with it. One was, of course, the malfunction, just as in Bayreuth, right? The noise and the creakiness, and so that exposed the limits of technology. But then there's also a philosophical issue here. If it is the machine that animates everything, where are the gods? Where's humanity? Like having the machine, ultimately the machine became a character. And the machine could be read as an architectural design or as a sculpture, because the machine could never be fully put into the stage frame, right? So the machine exploded that two-dimensional surface that Wagner wanted. It just wasn't able to be integrated. Like we could see into the wings, we could see up, like there were very few seats in the auditorium from which the stage was fully integrated into the stage picture. And thereby the machine always became visible as a machinery or as sculpture or as an architectural piece outside of the frame of the stage, but also outside the frame of the story. And I think even on that philosophical level, of course, Wagner would have really objected, because it's the machine ultimately that animates that ring cycle, the Page ring cycle. So those are some quick thoughts. Great question. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we get an aloha from Hawaii from John Chilcott, and he says, I believe that COVID has shown the limits of technology and that there is no real substitute for live performance. Do you have a same or similar view?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think yes, technology has always been limited. And so in some sense, I think it's as limited to do Zoom opera as it is trying to stage the Ring in a realistic fashion with 1876 technology. I think it's very interesting what technology has tried to do, but then there is an element of liveness that just is inherent, I think, in much of operatic experience that no virtual technology can replace. And I hear you're having some hybrids and some in-person performances back on the West Coast in I don't know about Hawaii. I've been just to my very first event at the Met, and it was just this, unsurpassable to have the sound hit my body and to feel the energy of the singers live. So yes, the technological mediation is always limited. And then on the other hand, we can say that in the theater, it's also limited because I'm sitting up there in the family circle and the stage is like very far away. And so I have a very limited view of some of the details that are going on stage versus some people sitting closer by. So there's always limits, but I agree personally that liveness has a lot to offer that just cannot be replaced online.
Well, you actually feel the energy of the music coming up from the pit.
Exactly.
It vibrates the air where you are, and it is,
exactly.
You cannot get that. Well, I suppose you could be turned it up loud enough in your living room, but it's just not the same.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We've got a question from Corey. Can you speak to lighting techniques in 1876? And thank you for the wonderful talk, Corey ends that question with. So what were they doing for lighting at the time? I know, correct me if I'm wrong, Wagner had gas lights in Bayreuth, but didn't he, I was told that he pre-wired for electricity because he was getting ready for the next trend in illumination.
So yeah, he had Bayreuth had gas lighting, which was standard at the time, even though some theaters had already experimented with electricity. So in some sense, Wagner tragically missed out on the early electricity. What's interesting is that Wagner personally resisted electricity, so he didn't pre-wire the.
I thought he had. Okay.
And even his own home, he didn't want to have electricity, and he said, "I'd rather go to Italy in the winter than have electricity in my home." So really, his aversion to technology was such that he avoided it as much as possible. But of course, soon after his passing, electric lighting became the next thing. And so what's interesting there is that also sped up. It's a very good question because it also sped up the obsolescence of Wagner's approach. Because the same happened when gas lighting became the norm, replacing candle lights in the early 19th century. The increased light of the gas lighting showed the artifice of the staging. Right? When you suddenly have more light, you suddenly see that this is just painted canvas. You suddenly also see, interesting for my project of like flattening and distance, increased lighting allowed the singers to move further backstage, to use more of the stage space. But that busted the idea of illusionism because suddenly the singer was standing next to a painted backdrop or a flat that was foreshortened. And so the real height size of the singer undid the foreshortening of the stage image. So that is something that Wagner contended with. And then once electricity came up after Wagner's passing, most theaters contended with as well. So they had to redo that, spurned in the 19th century the rise of realistic practical scenery rather than just painted flats and drops. And then in addition, he had the full spectrum of colors. So they used painted glass lenses in front of the footlights and in front of the different lightings that they used. So he really had all the different colors available at the time. So he was at the height of the time. And they used some electric light effects like the used famously since even before 1849, but famous with Meyerbeer's Le Prophète, the electric arc lamp for short light effects. So those are some ideas on technology, lighting technology of the time.
Yeah, and he was very specific about what he wanted. I mean, I always think about the entrance of the Dutchman and Flying Dutchman. Mm-hmm. The music royals, and then he's supposed to set his foot down, and then there's another rolling of the waves, or the
Yeah.
setting, and then another footfall. He was very specific about what he wanted to have going on and when he wanted it to
Yeah.
happen in order to create a unified image and
Absolutely.
stagecraft. Yeah, it was quite amazing. Well, he spent a lot of time in the theater in his life. And so he saw what worked and what impressed him, and he knew what he wanted to have done in his own works. Well, am I out of questions here? Nobody has any other questions here? Goodness. Emma, do you have a question, Emma?
Yes.
Emma always has interesting questions.
Thank you. I have a question about opening the curtain and shutting the lights in the auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
Was Wagner actually the first one to demand this improvement? Before that, the theater, opera, and even theater were just for general entertainment, visiting, drinking, having candy, and not paying attention unless a great diva sang.
Yeah. No, Wagner was not the first at all.
Not the first,
And as always, everything in Wagner goes back to models, goes back to people before and writings that he knew and practices that he knew, but he pushed it one step further. So there were various people, both architects and theater practitioners, who demanded that the auditorium should be darker. And there were various theories written down of how to do this, and in what way should the stage apparatus be concealed, and how dark should the auditorium be, except nobody was able to realize that. And so just by having his own theater, Wagner was able to actually pull it off. But there were theaters that were dark, not completely dark maybe, but that were darkened. There was also a theater by which he was inspired that had an almost complete hidden orchestra in Riga. So he took these ideas that were circulating, but put them together coherently, not just one idea and another idea. And then, of course, in Bayreuth, manifested in a way that absolutely made it imperative that there was nothing else to be looked at, nothing else to be done. You can't get out of those rows once you're in. There's nothing else you can do. So he was the one who most radically embodied those practices.
Okay, we have a question from David. Thinking of the desire for flatness of the stage picture, did this affect Wagner's direction of his actors? For example, movement upstage or downstage?
Great question. Yes, he did. Fantastic question. So I left that out, but in order, I mentioned once there was more lighting possible with gas lighting, singers were able to use the whole stage space. But when singers went to the back of the stage, they were too tall for the sets. So in various instances, Wagner worked with children, and he had children in the background. We have that in Tannhäuser with the Pilgrims March. There's children in the background, and then they go off into the wings, and then the adult singers come in from the front to completely keep the illusionist idea that this is all within one representational painting, where you can't just suddenly distort the proportions. Another fantastic thing is the entrance of Lohengrin, where there's a stage manual based on the Dresden premiere, where Friedrich Heine, with whom he worked, outlines that there's also a child actor dressed like Lohengrin, pulled on a miniature swan at the back. And exactly like you said, Terry, exactly like on this level of the stage, that's exactly where the child singer has to be moved across the stage and goes into the wings, and then the adult Lohengrin comes out in the front. So he couldn't, of course, with big choir chorus masses, he couldn't always do that. And I think it's no coincidence that his later operas have fewer choirs, coming back, of course, with Götterdämmerung and then Parsifal. But he was very, very cognizant and conscious of that.
Right. We've got another, just a comment. Or so, would you say that Wagner predicted or perhaps prefigured movies and virtual reality? I think the answer there would be, yeah, to a certain degree.
That's so much debated. There's entire books on that. We will never know. I think on the one hand, yeah, Wagner today would be a video game person, right, to fully immerse the audience. And we must not forget at the basis of this, the political agenda that he had, right, of integrating the people, of educating. So you might well ask, what is the best means today of reaching people and educating them? So, you know, that would be possibly some video games or some Netflix series or something. On the other hand, there is the liveness. He wanted to insist on the naturalness of the body and insisted on the effect. He didn't have the psychology of the time, right? But today he would probably argue with psychological knowledge of bodies together in space and the empathy that can transmit from one body to the next, etc., to also emphasize the importance of being in the same space. So the answer is, you know, we can't know, and I'm not sure. Technologically, absolutely. Ideologically, I'm not so sure.
I think he would make the best use of the technology, and he did. He made the best use of the technology at hand, created some of his own technologies to help augment what he was doing, and dealt with the frustrations of what he couldn't do, you know. Right. So, but he was very specific about what he wanted and demanded it of everybody, you know. Yeah. So I always find it very interesting and wondering what it would be like to go back in time, but we're used to what we're used to now. Well, I think we are running out of questions here, so we'll go ahead and thank our guest. Again, this was really interesting and very well supported with all your video tools, or your visuals were really quite wonderful. And we really appreciate you joining us. And thank you all to all of our members and guests who were with us today. I want to remind everyone that next meeting will be live and in person with Will Berger, Metropolitan Opera broadcaster and author and good friend of mine. He's going to be out here for other reasons, so we're lucky to be able to get on his calendar, and that's November 13th at 1:00 p.m. over at our old haunt, the JCCSF. Again, you will need to reserve a spot for this ahead of time, and you will also be subject to the City and County of San Francisco hygiene protocols for COVID, so be forewarned. And then beyond that, again, is our beautiful Cosima party, Sunday, December 12th at the Marines Memorial Club and Hotel. Be looking for a lovely invitation to come to you in the mail soon. And we're really grateful to all of you who attended today. Thank you very much. Thank you, Gundula. It was a treat.
Thank you so much.
To meet you in person. I would like to do that sometime in the future.
I would love to attend the next event.
If our paths cross. We were supposed to be having Tristan and Isolde here this summer in San Francisco, but got COVID canceled. We found that out from Paul Curran, who was our last guest. So thank you all, everyone. We appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you, Gundula. I really enjoyed your talk.
Thank you. You're welcome. I'm glad.
And I happen to love the machine, one of the few. But, you know, that's where man becomes machine. And as you said, the machine takes its own life. But it's appropriate. Now, to me, it looks appropriate. It's much better than the Bayreuth production with Lenin and the rest of them.
I actually really liked it conceptually too. I think they set it up wrongly because Peter Gelb tried to market it as immersive, and that it was not. Right? He marketed it as the wing that Wagner would have wanted, and I think that set people up on the wrong expectation. Also because the previous ring, the Schenk, was so naturalistic and realistic, right? So I think had it been marketed differently, I think philosophically that was really, really interesting. So I agree with you.
I liked it to a certain degree, but when they started projecting the backstory to one of the narratives, I thought, oh God, I don't like that at all, where you could see Sigmund being chased by the wolves and the fighting of Hunding's men and all that. I thought, oh, come on now, this is just too much. And I found that annoying, but of course the singing was wonderful and the orchestra was grand. So,
yeah.
Okay then. So, well, bye-bye everybody.